Hey everyone, welcome to Broken Lord Order. Today we're taking a look at a bunch of small campaign tweaks and fixes that I use on every single one of my playthroughs, and that you might want to use on any of yours too. So a few small rules before we get started. One, all of these have to be small in scale. I don't want things that change the entire foundations of the campaign system. Two, these have to apply to all factions, so individual faction fixes and the like will not apply here. And three, these have to maintain huge compatibility focuses. I don't want to be enabling and disabling these for each individual playthrough. By that same token, all of these should maintain compatibility with virtually all of your mods as well. With that said, let's get started.
Wow.
Alright, first on the list is Frosty Disappearances No Degradation Persistent Summons mod. This does virtually what it says on the tin. It makes all of the units that you summon into battle, such as calling in zombies, calling in clan rats from underground, calling in Ushtabi for the Tomb Kings, and removes that degradation effect that causes them just to vaporize from sheerly existing. This actually goes a little bit beyond that, and we'll get into some of the changes later, but that's sort of the top-down view of what it does. I'm sure some of you are absolutely screaming about how this is going to make the Vampire Coast, Vampire Counts, and Skaven gratuitously overpowered, but actually the mod factors that in, so any spell that introduces new units is going to have its Winds of Magic costs quite substantially increased. For example, summoning in Skeleton Spearman, or Skeleton Swordsman I should say, now costs like 16 Winds of Magic if memory serves. So the cost is definitely up there. On top of that, this also affects the AI the same way as it affects you, so while individual faction to faction balance might not account for that, it does mean that you're not going to get a huge advantage by having it be only for the player. As for why you'd use this or why you wouldn't use this, definitely in the pro column for me is the fact that this makes summons actually somewhat more useful. I mean, for one thing, things like having, 7 to 9 abilities to summon zombies or summon skeletons was virtually useless in campaign because the majority of them are going to disintegrate long before you can actually utilize any sort of usefulness out of them. The other thing that's nice about it too is if you have units that you want running a long way around or waiting in ambush or doing something specific with, this gives you an option to actually wait it out and do that. Like one that leaps off to my head is the Feral Manticore summon. You can actually have it chill out, wait for a moment to strike, come in from behind, and then attack from behind, whereas if you tried that in the vanilla game, it would have been disintegrated long before you got into combat. As for why you wouldn't use this, I mean, the only ones I can think of are A, you're a super big stickler for vanilla content and you don't want that modified in any way, or B, you just never ever take summons and you don't want the AI getting any kind of advantage for using them. I did say that there was quite a few things that this changes, but in spite of that, this actually has fantastic compatibility. I have never ever seen a mod conflict with this. The only times that things do get changed is, for example, on the Nanu's Pirates of Certosa overhaul, you can summon living Prometheans, and they're simply not affected by this, right? They break and route on their own. This mod can't interfere with that because obviously he wouldn't have any method of knowing that you've added in that mod. But like I said, absolutely zero compatibility issues. On top of that, it's actually even safer than most. This is totally save game compatible. You can throw this into the middle of a playthrough, try it out, and if you don't like it, just disable it again. And you're not going to break your save in any capacity. So should you use No Degradation Persistent Summons? It's up to you whether or not you want to continue using it, but I would strongly recommend you at least try it out. Worst case scenario, you throw it into a save, try it out for a few turns, you know what really doesn't work for you, that's fine, just take it back off again, no harm, no foul. But at least do go and download it and give it a good chance first before you make that call. Next on the list we have Pettitissam Emeritus, which is Latin, kind of weird Latin mind you. Pettitissam means skilled and emeritus means someone who still holds their title even having retired. So for example, say you were the chief of police and you still maintain the title of chief of police even after you've stopped being it. So in a roundabout way, it sort of does mean skilled veterans in Latin, which, right out of the gates, awesome title. Obviously, unlike the previous mod, this one's effect probably wasn't too obvious from the label. But like I said, it roughly translates to skilled veterans, and that is what this does. This replaces the default CA level up effects with ones of its own. This adds 4 attack, 6 defense, 5% accuracy, 5 leadership, and 5 reload skill or rate of fire increase, along with increased fatigue recovery for each individual level up. This is actually the half strength. He has another one that I believe is twice as much as these values. I typically tend to prefer this one myself though. So right out of the gates, more so than every other mod on this list, this one has a pretty profound balance impact. Right off the top of my head, buildings that provide free levels at startup become quite a bit more powerful and useful. Rogue armies and roaming pirates become extraordinarily powerful thanks to the fact that almost all of their units are typically levels 4 and up. Usually most of them are level 6 and up. And, you know, if the AI gets early doom stacks and stuff, they tend to have a pretty easy time running all over their neighbors. In fact, by the time you get there, you might actually find them extremely difficult to counter yourself because their units will have so much stats going their way that they become an extremely tough counter. Continuing with the theme of balance, one of the other issues that crops up as a result of doing flat bonuses instead of unique bonuses like what CA does is that it typically tends to benefit the tier 1 high model count units significantly more than the tier 5 or in tier 4 low model count units quite a bit. So for example, if we take a look at Skaven slaves, they have horrible stats normally, right? 12 melee attack, 12 melee defense, but 180 unit count. You know, they're meant to be a tar pit unit. But as you can see with this, if we level them up to level 9, suddenly, I mean, like, they've got a melee defense stat of 64, a leadership stat of 80, and 180 model count units. That's going to benefit them a heck of a lot more than only 45 depth guard who have, you know, 85 melee defense, right? Like, it's quite a bit skewed in favor of the low tier stuff. The only other issue that kind of crops up, and the one that's kind of disheartening to see, is that this renders Regiments of Renown practically pointless. Even though they're level 9, they don't actually get the benefits of actually being level 9 because they don't level up to get there. You know, even a tier 7 unit going up against a Regiment of Renown will just absolutely obliterate it without even breaking a sweat. He does actually have a mod that corrects for it. Unfortunately, I'm not really crazy about it myself, as it does uncap the amount of Regiments of Renown you can recruit, which is a little disheartening for me, right? It kind of removes the specialness of them, right? The upshot to doing a flat bonus like this is that it ties in absolutely just peachy with other mods. There's no compatibility issues at all, and it works with new units right out of the gates. So for example, if you like the Doom compilation, all those new units were affected by skilled veterans, no problem. The downside to doing it this way, of course, is, like I mentioned earlier, you know, it affects new units in different ways than what maybe the mod author originally intended. So back in the day, I actually used to have a mod that added in Tomb Swarms for the Tomb Kings, and they had a crazy high model count, like 240 or something ridiculous, but pathetic stats normally. But if you got a couple of levels into them through buildings, or through provincial bonuses, or what have you, they were practically unassailable by mid-game. You had just this huge teeming swarm of units that were virtually on par with the best units that the Tomb King's infantry had to offer in terms of stats. You know, it's like I said, there's a bit of a plus and a negative there. This actually solves one of the issues I had in the base game anyway, which is that I found Lords and Heroes just a little too powerful. Like, sometimes I had matches where I'd literally just run in the Heroes and the Lords and leave all my infantry units back in the base game just because they were high enough level on their own that I could literally take on the entire army no problem. This makes that kind of strategy very, very inadvisable. You have to think a little bit more tactically when it comes to your Lords and Heroes, because sending them into a tier 9 infantry squads, chances are it's going to get them killed if you're not paying attention. On that same vein too, this also makes it really, really rewarding when you've kept a unit alive since turn 1 on a game. I mean, when you've got your little tier 1 unit going toe-to-toe against a tier 5 unit and actually winning late game, something like that's really cool to see, right? You can see the progression in your own units. That makes it super, super rewarding to play as, like an RPG system almost. So in conclusion then, this is going to be the kind of mod where if you like what it does, take it. If you don't like it, leave it, right? Myself, I can't possibly imagine playing without this. I find it adds so many layers to the game, but that's just my take. Alright, next up we got a fairly simple one. It's Home Regent Movement Bonus. I've actually been using this one since Total Warhammer 1. I've always appreciated it. Basically, it just adds in a 10% movement bonus to any friendly owned terrain in the game. There's a second version available with 25%, but personally I go for the 10% one. If you're already a little bit ahead of the curve now, you can see this does typically punish horde armies a little bit more so than traditional ones, as horde armies obviously don't have any friendly territory to run around on. But that said, the balance impact for them is quite minor. Typically I use this because I find it immensely annoying when you have an enemy show up in one of your territories, be that horde, rogue, or even just a normal conventional army, and you have to proceed to chase them across half the known world because you can never actually fully catch up to them. What this does is give you that little bit extra movement bonus that if someone commits to attacking you, they're not just going to keep running away until you stop chasing and then continue to raid or do whatever they're doing. This way you can actually catch up to them, end that army once and for all. Compatibilities is non-issue whatsoever. I think if I remember correctly, it does have some issues with SFO because that one also affects things like movement bonuses and stuff, but I don't use SFO myself, so I really can't comment on that. But literally every single mod that I've used works just peachy with this. Even ones that add in new factions, as long as they've got their own turf, this pops right back up and running, no problem. Should you use it? Yeah, myself, I strongly recommend this one. Again, it's also quite save game compatible. Feel free to toss it in, try it out. You don't like it, take it back off. No harm there. But in general, I think the vast majority of you will prefer what this does to gameplay as opposed to the vanilla version. Next on the list, we have another sequel to a Total Warhammer 1 mod I used. This is Tier 4 Minor Settlements 2, the sequel. Does exactly what it says on the label. This is going to make so minor settlements that previously could only go up to level 3 can now go up to level 2. Kind of like our previous mod, this one doesn't affect every faction per se. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Wood Elves, of course, don't get access to Tier 4 minor settlements because that wouldn't make sense for them. Norska is also not really touched upon this because it's pointless in their particular case. They don't gain anything from it. And then, of course, Hordes don't have buildings, so of course they don't get anything from this either. But that being said, for all the rest of the races, this goes a little bit beyond what you might think at first glance. Sure, like you would assume, this does unlock the option to build Tier 4 buildings so that you can free up your main line to do more important stuff. But this also makes things like the garrisons a lot stronger in your minor settlements. You don't necessarily have to worry about losing them the second someone looks at your minor settlements funny. This also gives better bonuses to that mainline building tree for your minor settlements too. So, you know, it varies on a roster by roster basis, but, you know, typically whatever Tier 3 did, Tier 4 will do just a little bit better. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out this is obviously going to benefit Wood Elves, Norska, and Hordes a lot less than it benefits everyone else. In fact, it won't benefit those first three. So, you know, it makes things ever so slightly more difficult for those first three, but we're talking, you know, minor variations here. If you're already struggling to take on the minor garrisons, you've got bigger problems going on with your campaign. This mod's not really the big fault there. The bigger impact value from this is what this does for factions that are a bit more Tier 4 dependent. So like a prime example of this that I always think of is the Lizardmen. In the vanilla game, the Lizardmen are utterly overwhelmed on their major settlements. They have way too much Tier 4 and Tier 5 stuff that they can possibly deal with on their major settlement. This takes a lot of the pressure off, so it benefits, for example, say the Lizardmen a lot more so than it benefits others. So for the pros and cons of this, I actually find that this one's virtually all pro. So I did say that, yeah, sure, this benefits certain factions more than others, but I find that the ones that it benefits, it doesn't make them overpowered. It kind of just makes them less annoying to play. So like those Lizardmen that we just touched upon, rather than having to get frustrated about wasting a good chunk of your building slots, you can now actually specialize your stuff a lot more. If you have a lot of mods that add in a lot more buildings, this is also immensely beneficial. And lastly, in spite of what you might think, this doesn't actually allow you to do everything in one province, no harm, no foul. I actually find that this does a lot more specializing. So if you're going to do a military province, you're going to load up all your Tier 5 buildings into your major settlement and all your Tier 4s and less into your minor ones, and this lets you really focus that province into military. Similarly, if you want to do, say, a slave province as the Dark Elves, you now have the option to load up minor settlements with the slave posts, or slave pens, whatever they're called. If you want to do an income provinces, say the vampire counts, you have the option to boost up your income in your minor settlements and then have your mainline settlement with the treasure hoard building line. again, it gives you a lot more options to focus your provinces. I don't really actually have any cons for this mod, with the sole exception of this isn't save game compatible. So previously, I think everything on this list, if you didn't like it, you can just take it back out. This one doesn't follow that. If you start a save game, decide halfway through, you know what, I feel like this makes things too easy for me, or this makes things too hard for me, unfortunately that save's sticking with this mod, or you're losing that save. Now, compatibility with this one being, I would say, probably the biggest change of all the mods in this list, is the most touchy out of them all, but it's still not bad. So, I mean, the obvious compatibility issues are common sense ones. Anything that changes your minor settlements is going to affect this. So, ones that make tiers 1 to 3 more powerful are going to make tier 4 in this seem kind of pointless if you go that route. I have heard that this also has huge issues with things like Steel Faith Overhaul and the like. It will run with them, it's just, of course, balancing isn't a 1-to-1 anymore, right? That being said, for the majority of, you know, vanilla mods and vanilla content and all that kind of stuff, this fits in just peachy. And even in those ones that I mentioned, it's not like you won't be able to boot the game, it's just that the content no longer makes sense balance-wise. So then, of course, the final judgment, should you get this? This is probably my single favorite mod on this entire list, but this is also probably the most subjective out of all the mods in this entire list. This is one of those things where even just listening to what I'm telling you about it, you've already made up in your mind whether or not you like this one. Myself, I can't possibly imagine playing a game without this mod active. It wouldn't make any sense to me. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that the game didn't ship with tier 4 minor settlements in the first place, just based around the design of all the building chains. Like I said, for me, this is a wholehearted recommendation, but yourself, maybe make a brand new playthrough, try it out, see if it tickles your fancy. I suspect the overwhelming majority of you will appreciate it, but, you know, give it a shot and try it out. And with that, we're going to wrap it up for today. I'm going to have another half of this video set up and hopefully out within the week. I'm going over just a few more options, as well as some very, very big things that should be added in as well. So keep an eye out for that. As always, thanks for watching. Hope to see you all next time.